Right, we are starting today with the tragic flight disaster dominating the news this morning.
Yes, yesterday an Air India flight which was bound for London Gatwick crashed in Western India shortly after takeoff.
Yeah. Sadly, one of those who's believed to have lost his life is Fiongal Greenlaw-Meek. Now, Finlay appeared on This Morning twice this year. We loved his energy that he brought to the studio. Fiongal was on board the plane with his husband, Jamie. The couple posted videos online about their flight just before boarding. And our thoughts and our prayers go to their loved ones and all those affected by this terrible tragedy.
Of the 242 people on board, 241 lost their lives, including 52 from the UK, making it the worst aviation disaster involving British nationals since the 9/11 attacks.
Incredibly, one passenger, a British man from Leicester, miraculously survived the crash and was able to walk away from the wreckage. One of his brothers has since spoken out. Take a look.
When he was on the runway, my dad called him and Vishwa said, "Oh, we're going to take off soon." And then literally like 2 minutes later, he video called my dad. As he crashed, he said, "Oh, our plane's crashed." All of that. I don't know where my brother is. I don't see any other passengers. I don't know how I'm alive, how I exited the plane. This is a miracle he survived. What about the other miracle for my other brother?
It's an extraordinary story. The sole survivor, Vishwas Ramesh, was sitting in seat 11A, which has prompted lots of discussions about flight safety. And we're joined now in the studio by pilots Captain Mike Davis and Captain Emma Henderson, MBE. Morning to both of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Let's
start off with you, Captain Mike. You've been doing this for over 40 years, isn't it now?
Indeed, yes.
I mean, when you see something like this happen, it must really trigger you as a pilot. Has anything terrible ever happened where you've had to deal with it on your watch?
Not on the aircraft, but of course it's something we do practice 4 times a year in the simulator, where we get more incidents or problems than we'll ever experience in a lifetime, which we deal with, we're trained to deal with. So when it happens on the aircraft, it's very much like the simulator. You sit there and think, I've done this before.
Yeah. So you go through lots of procedures.
Absolutely, everything is procedural. Everything is standard operating procedures, so the two of us know exactly what the other guy is doing.
Yeah. So you're both hugely experienced pilots, and obviously the footage is quite grainy, but what are your first thoughts?
Well, we deal with facts in aviation rather than speculation, as you know, but there are some things that we can see on the video that we wouldn't expect to see after takeoff, and the main one being that the landing gear, so that's the wheels that the aircraft rolls down the runway on, the landing gear remains down, and that's not something we'd expect to see in a normal circumstance with an aircraft taking off.
Goes up quite quickly, does it? Like...
Yeah, the first noise you hear, you've been on an aircraft, the first noise you hear after takeoff, that sort of rumbling noise, is the wheels coming up into the undercarriage, because we want the aircraft to be as slippery as possible. Sure. There's a lot of drag caused by the gear hanging down underneath the aircraft, which doesn't actually stop it from flying, but it does cause a lot of drag. So if you have a power problem, then that becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah. What about you?
Do you both agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. The gear down is a real why. What happens subsequently, my initial thoughts have almost been wiped out by other videos coming on that have updated my views on things.
Yeah, of course.
And to tell you the truth, I have no idea. This is such a novel incident that I don't think anybody really knows. We've got to wait until the accident investigators have got the black box and the cockpit voice.
And you're so right, you have to do the facts, not speculation, right? So, I mean, a lot of people are going to be flying today, understandably, I suppose, are concerned by this footage and this terrible tragedy. But you want to reassure people how safe flying is, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, both of us agree on this as well, that, you know, we have had an unfortunately large number of incidents in the last 6 months, but statistically, it is still safer to fly than it is to drive to the airport. And the reason that these stories get such a lot of coverage, of course, is not only the large tragic loss of life, but it's so unusual.
Yeah,
it becomes
so rare, isn't it?
really rare. Absolutely. Which is why, exactly as Mike says, that's why we go in the simulator and practice for these things, because aircraft are so well tested and so safe that these things just never happen until, of course, they do.
So for people who are out there at the moment and they're about to go fly and they're getting maybe a little bit anxious, because, I mean, this was a flight that was relatively quite a safe flight to aircraft to be flying on. Yeah. What would you say to people who are a little bit concerned, a little bit nervous now about flying? It
is such a rare event. And just see how many aircraft are actually flying. Go on Flight Radar or one of the apps that allow you to see all the aircraft in the sky. And just the thousands of them up there right at this second.
Yeah.
And how infrequently anything hits the news that something has happened. The chances of anything happening is so minute.
Yeah.
You know, I was watching the news last night, and the Dreamliner, the plane has a very good record, and I've flown Air India, and it's, you know, it's brilliant service and so forth before. So, like you said, it's, you know, it's so unbelievably rare. Mike, can you talk us through some of the checks that the pilots would make before the aircraft takes off?
Well, there are very, very many. Generally, we turn up at the aircraft an hour or so before departure, run through a whole sequence of checks, work out performance figures for the aircraft weights, the runway length, the temperature, the wind, the air pressure, get a performance figures, enter those all in the flight management computer. We then do checks before start the engines, do more checks after the start, do more checks as we're taxiing out. And more checks before we line up on the runway.
And you've got the ground crew doing the same, I suppose. You know,
well, yes, on the initial thing, they do the walk-around.
At the airport, yes. What happens in the walk-around?
It's really just making sure... The pilots do it as well.
Yeah.
Generally, the first officer will do it if it's raining, the co-pilot. But it's just checking everything is in order. There aren't any leaks, there aren't any dents, nobody's driven into it.
Is there anything on the aircraft that shouldn't be? Is there anything not on the aircraft that should be? It's literally that basis.
It's always thorough.
Yeah.
Very.
Very.
And everything cross-checked as well. I think that's really important to mention, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is all cross-checked. And with a modern aircraft like the 787, it's all on the checklist. It's an electronic checklist. And if it comes to that item and it hasn't been done, it won't allow you to go any further.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating seeing the fact that there was one survivor. He was sitting in seat 11A. Is there a safer place to sit on the flight? Because isn't that right by the emergency exit?
Well, arguably, it would be, you know, you traditionally sort of suspect that down the back would be the safest place. In previous accidents, we tend to not obsess about accidents. We do look at accidents and incidents a lot as pilots so that we can find out what not to do next. And traditionally, the back of the aircraft can be the safest place to sit in many ways. But, I mean, in an incident like this, the fact that he survived is a miracle. How he walked away, to walk away from something like that, you just have to think, you know, that's completely inexplicable.
Unbelievable.
And I suppose where you are in the plane is how safe that is dictated by, terrible thing to say, but what sort of crash it is.
It is,
right?
yes.
Very much so.
And exits, how far away you are from the exit.
Yeah. And compliance as well, you know, when we've seen things happening in the past, in Japan last year, you know, everybody got off that aircraft because they all did as they were told, and they didn't take their bags and they weren't rummaging for their phones. They were told to evacuate the aircraft, so they did.
That's a really good point. You've got to kind of just forget everything that you own and get out.
Absolutely.
It's your life.
None
That's
of
so
that
important.
matters, but absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, my
Emma,
goodness.
A lot of kids, you know, can't help with this, or, you know, just through their parents, I suppose, and if they see the footage by accident and then they're flying or they hear about it in the schoolyard, what would you say to try and, like, advice for parents to reassure their children?
Well, I think going back to what Mike said before, that there are roughly 100,000 aircraft airborne every single day. And I took a flight back to Inverness yesterday as this news broke, and then got on another one to come back down here last night, knowing that, of course, there is a risk. When you go into a metal container that's 7 miles above the planet, there is an element of risk to everything we do. But it is still more dangerous to ride your bike down the street or to get in a car than it is to fly on an aircraft. So it's worth remembering that the stories that make the news are the ones where things go wrong. what doesn't make the news is the boring story of the aircraft took off, flew to where it was supposed to be, and then landed again. That's just boring.
And it happens all the time.
Absolutely, it does.
I read in my notes last night, I think you said you get more chance of becoming Prime Minister than you have been.
You've got more chance of becoming... I'm trying really hard to do that, but you have got more chance of becoming Prime Minister.
I'll vote for you.
Thank you. than you have, absolutely, than you have of being involved in something like this.
Yeah.
Even, you know, and I know there will be some people who will say, yeah, but you said that the last time something happened. And, you know, we do learn in aviation from the mistakes that have happened or from design errors that have happened. And whatever the findings are from this investigation, procedures will be put in place to make sure that this can never happen again.
So there will be learning from it for you.
Very
There's
much
been
so.
learning since the dawn of aviation.
That's
Things
Absolutely.
happen,
Yeah.
procedures are set in place, design changes are made to prevent it happening again. So
thank you
every
so
instant, it gets safer.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Really
An absolute
appreciate it.
pleasure.
And our
Thank
thoughts are obviously with
Yeah,
all
indeed.
Definitely,
people
very
who
much
were
so.
involved in that situation.
Oh, hello. Thank you for visiting our This Morning YouTube channel. We upload tons of new content every single day. So hit the subscribe button, like all the videos, and don't miss out. We'll see you in the morning.